spent, we'll learn a little bit more about his journey from fan to writer, his career path, his thoughts on the state of the team and the future. We'll be featuring questions from committee members as well as the audience. So please share a question in the Q&A, and we'll leave plenty of time at the end to answer them. Olli has generously offered around an hour of his time today for the session, so let's go ahead and kick off. First and foremost, Olli, good to see you. It's been a while.
A pleasure, an absolute pleasure.
As they say in The Sound of Music, let's start at the very beginning. So,
Perfect.
How did your love of football begin?
Okay, well, obviously, first of all, absolute pleasure to speak to you all. Hope everyone's keeping well, keeping safe, and thanks for it's really nice of you to invite me on to have a chat to you all tonight. How did my love of football begin? Why Liverpool? So, like a lot of boys, in England, I was sort of introduced to football through my family from early on. My granddad was a big Everton fan, ironically, and so was my mum. So that caused a bit of controversy in the family as I sort of started playing when I was younger, grew up and became a Liverpool fan. The reason it went for Liverpool over Everton was that so my great auntie, I suppose you'd call it, so my grandfather's sister and her husband were big Liverpool fans, and they took me to my first game when I was around 4 or 5. And from then on, they got me a shirt. I went to Anfield, and so it could have really been a toss-up between Liverpool and Everton. It was whichever sort of family member took me to a game first. But I think, thankfully, despite last week's result, I think long-term I made the right choice in the end.
Derby Day must be a fun day in the Emmerson household.
It is. It really is. Not so much when we lose, but thankfully that is quite rare.
Did you play growing up?
Yeah, not at a massively high level, unfortunately. I was probably more of an organizer and a leader in the teams that I played for rather than a star. I was very often sort of, a captain or vice captain, whatever, more because I think I used to play centre back and I'd organise quite well without necessarily being, the best on the team. I played centre back for probably about a decade until I was around 15. And then, because I used to actually be quite tall, but there was a point where I stopped growing and everyone else just shot up. So after a while, when I was sort of hitting 16, 17, I was sort of still the same sort of 5'9" I'd been since I was sort of an early teenager. And all my friends were shooting up to about 6 foot, 6'2", whatever. I moved to a more comfortable right back role where my height wasn't such a problem.
I was very much in the same position growing up. Realized around 14 that I'm probably a little bit more suited for management, maybe.
Yeah.
So, of course, I have to ask on behalf of the folks who haven't been. Do you have a favorite Anfield memory from growing up?
It's a difficult one. I'm probably kind of in a sandwich position between, obviously, you guys I've been out there in the US. It's difficult for you, especially at the moment, to get across to games, and I can appreciate as well how difficult it can be, not even necessarily to get over to England for games, but just to get tickets. So despite being sort of from in and around Liverpool, having family around there, I've never had sort of, access to, say, season tickets, things like that. So most of the tickets I got when I was younger came through friends of friends, sports clubs, things like that. But despite that, I'm still count myself quite lucky to have been to a healthy amount of, say, historic nights. If I had to pick a favourite, I would quite smugly say that I was lucky enough to be in the COP for the Dortmund Europa League game in 15-16 when Lovren scored the last minute winner. Me and my best friend were there, and I can confidently say that we tumbled maybe 9 or 10 rows just in pure elation when Lovren scored that winner. And the funny thing about it is, whenever it comes up in conversation, my friend, or Connor, his name is, he always mentions it to me and says, "Can you remember how much you were screaming at Lovren 5 minutes prior?" Because it must have been sort of the 85th minute in the game, and it was 3-3. We'd equalised, we'd equalised, and we were chasing the winner. And Lovren had just pinged a shot from about 40 yards that had gone way over, and I was just there like screaming at myself, like, "Oh, you always have to make it about you." I try not to swear, but you can imagine some of the expletives I was using. And then 5 minutes later, he popped up with the winner. So that's my favourite memory of being at Anfield.
Awesome, I love that. So, of course, last season was the first league title win that the younger generation of supporters like you and I have witnessed in our lifetime. How was that experience for you?
Amazing, obviously, but I think, as I'm sure a lot of people can relate to, sort of with obviously the circumstances going on around the world as we actually clinched the title mix. But, the season as a whole was fantastic. It's obviously by far the best Liverpool team we've ever seen in our lives. That run of results from sort of the start of the season through to, say early February was just absolutely incredible. I know City go on their runs sort of 20 in a row that count, Europa League, sorry, not Europa League, like Carabao Cup games and stuff as part of their win streaks. But I honestly can't see another team in English football going on that sort of run at the start of the season. It was strange in a sense. Obviously, we were in lockdown. We couldn't celebrate properly when we clinched the title, and I like to brag because obviously you mentioned at the start I'm a graduate of the University of Liverpool, and so I graduated last summer, and so I was there for 3 years. And in the first year I was there, we got to the Champions League final, unfortunately lost. In the second year I was there, got to the Champions League final, won. And in the third year I was there, we won the league. But unfortunately, by the time we actually clinched the league, I'd gone back home to sort of my family home due to sort of, education closing down because of the pandemic, which means haven't had proper chance to celebrate it in the city. But hopefully, the vaccines are out there. We're on the way up, as it were. And, I'm sure regardless of whether we're 4th or 14th by the end of the season, we're going to have a big party to celebrate the title when we can.
Absolutely. So I guess transitioning into your professional life a little bit, when did you figure out that you could combine that passion of football with journalism?
It was a strange one, really, because it started just as a hobby. And even as I got into more professional features of it down the line, it sort of remained a hobby for me in the sense that education-wise, I was doing, business at uni. So it wasn't necessarily just one path. So it was around 15 or 16 when I started writing for Vel. I got in touch with a guy, I think you'll be familiar with, Avery, called Charlie Milan. Really good guy. I think he works for the Daily Express now as a writer. Absolutely fantastic guy. Fantastic sort of red flowing ginger hair. He grew up not too far away from me, as it turns out. I've been to a couple of games with him, and he sort of took me on and took a bit of a chance on me, really getting me in as a young writer. I'd not done any sort of writing before, apart from English homework at school. What came on doing that and sort of progressed slowly through the ranks in Vel, and worked out that whilst it wasn't necessarily always going to be the profession that I dedicated myself to, there was real chances for me to improve and work with different people, have opportunities to go to games and sort of meet different people, that sort of made it something that I've really stuck at and become something of a passion for me over the last 5 or 6 years.
Absolutely, yeah. And of course, that's where you and I know each other from. But it's going a little bit more to modern days. How did you get involved at the Anfield Index?
So Anfield Index, it was always my favourite fan site. I think as Liverpool fans, we're really blessed to have a number of fantastic fan sites. I think, you've got the Anfield Wrap, Anfield Index, Redmen TV, and there's too many to list. What I always liked, I think, about the two, I'd probably call Redmen TV obviously more bit YouTube-y, where in terms of sort of the podcast scene, it's very much Anfield Wrap, Anfield Index. What I liked is that I think certain people might casually pigeonhole it as, Anfield Index maybe has more contributors from around the world, and that means it's for more sort of a global following, whereas the Anfield Wrap is more city-based, more local contributors. It's people in the city. But I actually think it works the other way around. From the way I see it, I think the Anfield Wrap, and fair play, I haven't worked with those guys, but I've met a couple of them, great guys. They do a brilliant job, and I think the fact they're in the city, have city contributors, that opens up sort of a really good insight for those people around the world. Whereas Anfield Index's sort of ability to have lots of contributors from around the world, America, Ireland, parts of Asia, Europe, sort of then goes the other way, in that it shows the people of Liverpool how much of a sort of passionate global following that they've got. And that was how I ended up getting involved with Anfield Index. I had a chat with Gags, the Anfield Index owner, again, like another great guy, can't speak highly enough of him, and just said, I've done some stuff for Vel, but obviously that was a more professional, sort of neutral, unbiased sort of writing I was doing, and wanted to get stuck into just stuff where I could, be a bit more biased towards Liverpool. So I got stuck into that, did some pieces and some podcasts for them, and thankfully, I'm still working with those guys to this day, and it's an absolute pleasure. So many absolute gems of men and women on that platform.
Awesome. And of course, mentioning Anfield Wrap, we were lucky enough to have Gibbo on. Probably
Absolute. I've met him once, and he was absolutely hammered. So I don't think he'll remember meeting me. It was in the concourse.
That's the case with some of us as well.
At a game, and yeah, he's great. And Neil Atkinson, I haven't actually met, but he's walked past me, and he has the most astonishing set of jumpers I've ever seen anyone wear. His fashion sense is, not for me personally, but the style and audacity with which he pulls it off is somewhat of a hero of mine.
He gave probably one of the best speeches I've ever seen at. We have a venue not too far from Fenway called the House of Blues, and they had
Okay.
like a live podcast of sorts before the Liverpool Sevilla match a couple summers ago, and very
He's
cool.
he's got away with words, I think, is the way to put it. He's very good.
So in terms of, I guess, staying on the topic of some of those publications, what do you make of this meteoric rise of so many of these fan-driven organizations?
I think it's fantastic because I think not only does it offer fans and people who wouldn't get into journalism or media outlets in the traditional sense, it gives them a chance to air their views and, interact with each other and build relationships. You guys building a community of people from an area that can come together with this sort of one harbour passionate love, which I think is brilliant. And at the same time, I think it's really good because I think it sort of puts a bit of an onus on traditional media companies to, up their game a bit. I think, especially I can't relate to the US as my knowledge isn't as good on, certain media outlets, but especially in the UK, there's a lot of sort of old traditionalist media that really have got, the writers are sort of in a carousel as like, as the same football managers are. So, how you have the relegation carousel of your Tony Pulis's, your Steve Bruce, your Mark Hughes, Big Sam, things like that. It's sort of the same for journalists within the UK media up to a point, but I think over the last decade, the emergence of fan media and maybe that, and another example is the Athletic coming over to the UK and starting to absolutely smash football coverage over here. I think it's really led to more traditional media groups upping their game, being more inclusive to the different diversities and getting a more varied range of opinions in on the game. And I think it's just sort of raised the level for everyone involved in covering and talking about football.
Absolutely. So I guess diving into sort of more of the day-to-day experience, but what's your experience been like with the players and the coaching staff? Have you had much exposure?
Probably less than some people might spoke to. In terms of the players, I haven't had much exposure. Probably more so when I was a kid, waiting out the side and looking for autographs. But in terms of attending press conferences, interviews, and things like that, I know you're asking specifically about Liverpool, but there's a good anecdote in terms of opening that up to sort of, Premier League media as a whole. So Jurgen Klopp, I haven't had too much exposure to him apart from being in his press conferences. It's just a ridiculously tall man. And he does smell nice, I'd like to say that. However, he does not smell as nicely as Antonio Conte, who might be the nicest smelling man I've ever met. So the typical thing is that when Premier League managers that walk in for a press conference sit down at the sort of a desk, and the writers will just sort of, where they've got sort of a little recorder or just an iPhone, they'll just run up to the table and just pop the phone in front of the managers and record it. And just occasionally you get sort of a waft of whatever aftershave they've gone for that day. And Antonio Conte's sort of cologne, I don't know what it is he wears. I didn't get a chance to ask him, but very nice smelling man. In terms of managers that I think have been really nice, and I had this one, David Moyes actually was a really nice guy. So when I started covering matches at grounds, as part of the sort of accredited media, I was only 18. I think might have been the youngest person ever to do it because you have to be 18 for insurance reasons, and I was sort of 18 years and a month old, and went up and said hi to David Moyes, just sort of like nodded like, "Oh, you're right," as I put the phone down in front of him. And next week I did another West Ham game, and he remembered me and said, "Oh, hi, how you doing? You okay?" Which I just thought was nice. West Ham won a bit of a poor run at the time, unsurprisingly, because Moyes isn't that good of a manager, despite what you see this season. And it was just nice for him to sort of take the time to ask me how I was doing and remember my face. The worst manager, Big Sam. And not because of anything he did or said, well, not because of anything nasty he did or said, but bear in mind, again, I was 18. I had enough confidence about me to be going to these matches, mixing with the media, but asking questions to managers was still kind of daunting. I'd never really done that much public speaking. I was just sort of this 18-year-old kid. Who was I to put in the way of these 50-year-old journalists trying to fill their Sunday morning pieces to ask a question to a manager? But I did the Liverpool-Everton game in, I think it was 2017-18. So it was in the snow, maybe in December. Salah scored the fantastic goal. I think that one goal of the year from outside the box. And then Everton equalised with a penalty. I think it was a bit controversial because Lovren sort of pushed Calvert-Lewin, but it was a bit soft. So it was that game. It ended 1-1. And in his press conference after, Big Sam had said that Everton had been boosted by the fact that Liverpool had rested, I think, Firmino and Mane going into that. I think we started sort of Solanke and Ings. But Liverpool had actually started the game much better, gone 1-0 ahead, and were playing much better football until Everton sort of got control of it and wrestled their way back into it. So I said to Big Sam, I didn't say, oh, you're right, Big Sam. I said, oh, Sam. So you said Everton were boosted by the fact that Liverpool rested some of their key players. But, as it turned out, Liverpool actually started the match much quicker and went ahead. Do you think that, that surprise element of, your Klopp's tactics actually sort of worked for Liverpool up to a point in terms of their fast start? And he just sort of paused, took a big sort of, gravy-filled breath, and just started going on about how Liverpool resting players wasn't an excuse for their performance levels. So I thought I asked a good question to Big Sam, but I don't really think he was listening to me, probably thinking about what sort of meat he was going to consume in the evening following.
So in terms of a lot of what you've experienced, is there something that stands out as, the most interesting part of having that transition into professional journalism and kind of having the opportunity to peek behind the curtain?
I think it's interesting. What I know what I think one of the things we talked about potentially speaking about was, what the sort of difference is from experience in games as a fan to going and, sitting in the press box and experiencing it from the media side. And it really is actually quite interesting how club allegiances and supports how that sort of, it's kind of a taboo issue how it crops up in press boxes, because some people quite traditionally look upon celebrating in the press box with very stern ways, and journalists are supposed to be neutral and stuff. So I would always keep myself quite somber, sort of reserved, whilst sitting in the press box. And then occasionally you go to games and the goal will go in and there'll be sort of very experienced 50, 60-year-old journalists sort of punching the air and going wild. You're like, oh, right, well, that's okay then. So I think that's probably the most interesting part, is that there is quite a variation in terms of which journalists or club officials are more willing to probably show their allegiances when a goal goes in while sitting in the neutral, inverted commas, press box.
I can definitely echo that. When I was covering Copa America in 2016, the entire Colombian contingent were literally dressed in jerseys.
Really?
So no semblance of lack of bias there. That's for certain.
Yeah. The biggest example I can remember is it's actually quite a controversial one, but what's he going to do? Kill me? So the chief football writer for the BBC is a guy called Phil McNulty. And he started by covering, when he was younger, he covered the Merseyside patch. So he did sort of Tranmere, expanded a bit Greater Manchester, did sort of Blackburn, Bolton. And although he's now the chief football writer for the BBC, unless there's really big games going on sort of down south, he tends to do your Cities, Uniteds, Liverpools and Evertons. And don't know if anyone will remember, because it's Everton, so why would you bother? But when Everton beat West Ham 3-0 a few years ago, and Wayne Rooney scored a hat-trick, and the third goal was Joe Hart sort of came out to clear the ball. It came back to Rooney on the halfway line, and just, in fairness to him, it was an incredible goal. Just first time, pinged it back over the Hart's head, and it went in for a hat-trick. And Phil, I'm there, sort of, I must have been 18, 19 at the time, sat next to the chief football writer for the BBC, and I'm there just trying to keep reserve, not getting his way too much, get on with what I was doing. And the Rooney goal goes in. He's just up on his feet, applauding. He's going wild. I'm like, bloody hell, Phil, how are you supposed to be neutral? Bloody BBC. But I'll let him. He was a nice guy, and he did have a bit of a chat with me and sort of asked me what I was up to, and so I'll let him off. But that was definitely one of the most experiences where I was like, BBC, national broadcaster, meant to be neutral, doesn't seem so neutral when their chief football writer's there begging Wayne Rooney to come over and just look at him.
We had a similar incident in the States. Obviously, Rooney being former Everton, former United, you don't really want to root for him, but he had a goal where he ran the entire length of the field, made a tackle in a DC United match.
I think I know the one you mean, yeah.
Absolutely whipped it to a guy who's about 5'4", who scored a last minute header. So
yeah,
it can't help but applaud it sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. I know the one you mean. That was an incredible piece of play.
In terms of the match day experience, how greatly would you say that differs from when you're writing versus when you're just able to watch as a fan?
So aside from obviously, the fact that I try not to celebrate Liverpool goals too much, even though it's difficult, when if I was sat in the press box, I think the main thing is it's not necessarily so much, the 90 minutes, but the outside bit of that. So, if I was going to the game with a friend and just sitting in the stand, we'd probably go to the pub beforehand, have a couple of drinks, get in early, sing some songs. Whereas, if I'm on media duty, it'll be you sort of get to the ground about an hour and a half before the game, wait for the team news to come out. You might be doing stuff on social media, whether it's Twitter or updating a live stream, things like that. And although I'm still passionate about it and like driving Liverpool to win in my head, I feel like I would detach myself slightly from my full-on supporter sort of ethos if I was doing media work. And then obviously again after the match, so I the best example of this is probably in the Champions League run in 2017-18 when we beat City away. We won 3-0 at home, then we went to the Etihad and won 2-1. And I hadn't been working for the first leg, so I hadn't managed to get a ticket either, unsurprisingly, for Champions League quarter final. So I just went to the pub with my friends and watched the game there, and we were just drinking, watching the football, singing songs, having a fantastic time. And after the full time whistle went in the first leg, we just carried that on into the night. Whereas I was working at the Etihad and in the press box for the second leg, and I'm absolutely buzzing when we win 2-1 and win to the semi-finals, and we sort of City sort of surged back in the first half of that second leg. We sort of overcame and eventually won, and I'm buzzing, ready to go. And I couldn't really celebrate it properly because I used to go back to the press conferences afterwards, and you have to be quite measured and somber and get on with your work. But then it went sort of the other way again because I left the Etihad that night and I was still studying Liverpool at that point. So I went to get the train back from Manchester to Liverpool, walked to the train station where there was a big group of Liverpool fans there getting on the train back. And they're all, doing the same things that I would have been doing. They've been to the match, they're having a sing, they're having a drink in the train station. So as soon as I get back to the train station, off comes my tie, I've unbuttoned my shirt, I'm just there holding my laptop bag, I'm just there singing the songs, having a great time with them. So on that particular night, it sort of gave a really good example of the differences from a fan point of view, then going to do the media work there. But I also thankfully managed to get a little bit of celebration with my fellow Reds at the end of the night at the train station, which is a memory that I hold quite deeply.
Terrific. So I guess transitioning to a little bit more about the team, looking at the season, what do you make of the struggles that they've experienced?
It's crazy, isn't it? And it's embodied obviously by the last sort of 6 weeks or so. So we had sort of a good way to put it is we had Boris Johnson, who I'm sure you've all got some interesting opinions of, gave us a bit of a roadmap out of lockdown earlier in the week. And about a month from now, I think it's the 29th of March, team sports are going to resume. So, you can go outside and play football, whatever. And I realised that the last time I actually played, before we got put back into lockdown, which was sort of towards the end of December, we were top of the table. And it doesn't actually seem that long ago. And now, we're celebrating that Man City have beat West Ham because West Ham are our competitors in Battle for Fourth. Obviously, though, in terms of reasons for it, I am signed up to the idea that I think certain journalists, people on the radio, on the television, are overthinking it a bit in terms of Liverpool's struggles. There have been times where players have underperformed, but I do tend to think that 90% of the issues we're finding is just a knock-on effect of those injuries. Virgil gets injured, awful news. We struggle against deep blocks because his passing's so good. Then Gomez gets injured. His pace is so crucial to what we do in terms of the press moving forward. The high line, it's sort of it was eroded a bit. And then, Matip comes in, plays arguably the best we've ever seen him play. He's injured. Fabinho's doing really well at centre-back, gets injured. And then as you start to bring Fabinho and Henderson in, the midfield gets a bit weaker. And it's not necessarily, I don't think, that the likes of Wijnaldum, Thiago, Curtis Jones have been playing poorly. Quite the opposite, in fact. But with sort of Milner and Keita having picked up injuries and just the team style getting shifted around, chopping and changing at the back, the whole sort of flow and fluidity of the team's been disrupted from a continual knock-on effect. And yeah, I'm not a fan of the Henderson at centre back either. But that's not Henderson's fault, I was looking forward to us getting some players back fit and getting him back into midfield, where I do like watching him play. And unfortunately now, it looks like he's going to be out at least until the last few games of the season. So whilst it is frustrating, and I found myself getting quite wound up watching the matches in the last few weeks, you do sort of have to just sort of take a pinch of salt with it and just think, we've had this amazing fortunes over the last couple of years. It's not going our way this season. Yes, things could be a bit better, but ultimately most of the problems we're having are coming from things that we can't control. And I'm a big philosopher. I'm a big believer in the philosophy in life, that if you can't control certain things, then, there's only so much you can do to get yourself wound up about them. But, Diogo Jota's getting back, Fabinho's getting back. Hopefully we can get a win tomorrow and start sort of rebuilding our season, because I do think that, that given it obviously won't be what we all hoped for at the start of the season, given everything that's gone on, I do think now if we can just get fourth, it will represent a really successful season, especially if we can progress past Leipzig and see if we can get into maybe a quarterfinal, semi-final of the Champions League.
Absolutely. So looking at kind of the season as a whole and the injury crisis, I mean, how do you rate the January business from Liverpool?
It's not so much the players bought that I have an issue with, but the timing. It was obvious that Liverpool needed to get centre-backs in from when Gomez and Van Dijk got injured, because we knew that Matip wasn't going to hold up. We knew that our midfielders, Henderson, Keita and Milner all quite commonly pick up injuries, so it wasn't going to be the case that we could just play Fabinho there consistently. Fabinho's had on and off injuries since then as a result of overplaying. It was obvious that deals needed to be done. And it wasn't the case, although obviously it did look at the end of the window. Liverpool went out and tried to get Caleta-Car from Marseille for, region between, I think it was 18 to 22 million pounds. So by the end of the window, there was money to be spent and we went for it. But the Kabak deal, and especially the Phillips deal, the Phillips deal, the Davis deal, could have been done at the start of the window. And I do think that poor run we've had in January that's stretched into February came as a result of that chopping and changing in the defence, a lack of trust, a lack of cohesion, which then knock-on effects the midfield. So Kabak and Davis, Kabak and Davis, not Phillips with the L. Kabak and Davis, if you'd have offered them two to me at the start of the January window, once I'd actually Googled who Davis was, I'd have said, yeah, that's fine. Let's just do it and get them in. But the fact that we were made to wait a month and, we all saw the poor results in January made it kind of a more frustrating thing. But hopefully now, I've been more impressed by Kabak than some. I think he's had, in the sort of 3 or 4 games he's had so far, I think he's had good stretches in all those games, and it's just been 5-10 minute spells where things have been going against the team and he's sort of had a bit of trouble. Thinking maybe the Leicester game towards the end, he did really well for sort of 65-70 minutes there, and then it was just sort of went tits up for everyone involved. So I do hold out hope for him, especially with Fabinho coming back. But yeah, like I say, not so much a problem with the personnel that we got in January, more a problem of the timing and why it wasn't done sooner.
Absolutely. Do you think that Davies' domestic status and the whole situation around all the transfer restrictions that we're seeing now with the UK played a factor?
Yeah, I think so. Because obviously, Kabak's age, I think meant he didn't have to be registered, and then Liverpool are at the cusp of having their sort of quota of non-UK passports exceeding. There was talk that if Liverpool were to bring someone in, it might mean sort of a Divock Origi had to go. Obviously, people, sporting directors at other professional clubs have got brains, so no one actually wanted to sign Divock Origi. And I think that sort of contributed to why we only got the 2 in the end. But I've watched some clips of Davis, I've listened to some podcasts, heard some Preston fans. I think he seems like, against teams that are just going to sit back against us and, park the bus, he seems like he'd be a good option. I like having that left footer at left centre-back. I feel like it can openly play a lot when we go forward. And it gives us a chance to then move Fabinho back into midfield, which I think would in turn make the defence better and also give Andy Robertson and Trent a lot more confidence to do what they do so best and get up that wing, give us the width to get up and down the channels, because they know that they've got Fabinho there rather than, say, like a Wijnaldum or Thiago to cover the defence.
Absolutely. Given what we saw from Billy Kumatillo in preseason, and I guess some of the struggles, for lack of a better term, with Reece Williams, are you surprised we haven't seen much of him?
In a sense, yes, but having listened to people that watch more of the under-23s and under-18s than I do, I think it probably would have just been a step too far for him. And I think the other factor with that is the confidence thing. So Reece Williams and Matt Phillips, I don't think before this season, and even probably after this season, Jurgen Klopp will have envisioned having much of a long-term future at Liverpool. So dropping them in for games because we've got no other options, where if it goes badly, it might wreck their confidence. If it goes well, fantastic. It's not so much of a loss, because if it doesn't go well and their confidence is shot, well, we were probably going to sell them anyway. You know, Nat Phillips was hours from leaving earlier in the season before we sort of ended up keeping him around. Whereas Kometio is someone that, despite having had some struggles this season from the 23s, the club do have really high hopes for. And he's a bit younger and less experienced at the senior level than Phillips and Williams. So I think Klopp's seen that and decided to stick the more experienced younger lads in, and also sort of just hold back the one that might not be as ready yet, but he's got longer hopes for in the future, because he doesn't want to risk sort of giving him too many knockbacks and damaging that confidence in the middle of a unique season, is the way to put it.
Do you make much of the conversations that we've seen sort of around some of the struggles with the front three, particularly kind of what we've seen from Bobby in the last season to season and a half?
Yeah, I think it's a shame with Firmino, because I love him, and I think we all do. He's one of the longest serving players at the club. He's such an enigma of a personality. He's bought really well into what the city is, what the club do. And, he's clearly loved by Klopp, which makes it even better. But I think it is frustrating, sort of, some of the chances spurned, some of the decisions he makes. And even more frustrating because the technical ability is there. It was only, 2 weeks ago that he came up with that absolutely amazing assist for Mo against Leicester, which looked like it was going to be a really good win for us before, like we said, it all went sort of to pot. I think Sadio Mane's had a disappointing season, but again, it's a knock-on effect. The defence is struggling, which means the midfield's had to compensate, and then it's gone on with Fabinho and Henderson being out or playing at centre back, which means we don't have a normal midfield structure. There aren't those normal patterns and links to the front three, and I think it's not necessarily that I want to sit here and tear down Mane and Bobby, but rather sit here and really praise Mo Salah for having, in a really difficult season, stood up and led the goal scoring charts in the Premier League, and hopefully he'll lead us to that top four finish and get a third golden boot, because I've seen the Michael Jordan, is it the picture of Michael Jordan? I'm really bad with basketball, so I have to apologise. Is it the picture of Michael Jordan holding the trophy in the locker room where he's holding it and looks really depressed and sad on his own? Yeah, I think I put a tweet out of that picture a couple of weeks ago with the caption, Mo Salah, when he scores 23 goals, gets his third golden boot and we come 8th. So hopefully that won't be the case. But yeah, credit to Salah, because he's been sublime this season. And if we are going to do anything in the Champions League, I think he is going to be the key to that.
Absolutely. I know something that maybe not as many people talk about as you would think, but the psychological aspect of things with, Klopp obviously losing his mother, with Alisson losing his father. How big a role do you think that plays or is going to play throughout the rest of the season?
I think it's difficult to say, without necessarily knowing those individuals, knowing how they operate. But, it's clearly a devastating time for anyone when they lose a family member or a close friend. And, mixed in with the whole world situation at the moment, things aren't normal. You can't necessarily grieve in the way you'd want to, meet up with family at times. It's difficult to judge how it's going to affect them in their work life, because, different people, because although football is a very emotional game, to these players and managers, it's still their job. And regardless of necessarily what's going on in their personal life, I would still trust, say, Klopp to be able to look at a match and be able to fix a problem or pick a good team selection in the same way that I trust Alisson to be able to perform brilliantly. So I wouldn't necessarily expect their performances to be downturned by, the personal tragedy that struck them. But if it was to be that case, then, how can you blame people, at this stage? The clubs, the world suffering, and then more specifically Liverpool, we're having a difficult season, and with it all just piling on, it goes back to what we said earlier in terms of, I'm sure we're all frustrated by results at the moment. It's not going the way we want to, but some certain elements of what's contributing to these bad results is just things that unfortunately we can't control as much as we'd love to.
Absolutely. So, of course, we're curious as Americans, particularly as Boston-based ones. What's the general sentiment around FSG at the moment?
I expected this question, and I awaited it with bating breath. So It's mixed, as I imagine it might be over there, because I've read again. So American football not good at, basketball not good at, baseball my knowledge of is worse than the other two combined. I've read recently that Red Sox fans seem upset at maybe a lack of investment, or was there a Major League Series winning team a couple of years ago has sort of been ripped apart, and they feel the investment isn't there. Is that the right sort of vibe that I'm getting from what I'm seeing on Twitter?
Yeah, definitely a combination of the two.
Yeah. So it's mixed over here. I think all Liverpool fans appreciate the FSG have made mistakes on the way, but at the same time, something that they've been consistently praised for is that when they have made mistakes over things like increasing ticket prices, that when they tried to furlough staff last year, they've U-turned on. And while some people might view that as a position of weakness, I view that as a position of strength. It's good to be, especially when you're making major business decisions. Nobody's perfect. People are going to make mistakes. It's good to be able to analyze the situation, hold your hands up and say, listen, we're sorry, we made a mistake. We're going to do it differently now. The problem comes when so many mistakes are made that people start to think, well, how many times are these guys going to have to, U-turn on a decision because they've made, a clearly bizarre decision in the first place? And then I think the frustration then comes with maybe the results on the pitch and a perceived lack of investment. I think, overall, I think the consensus is that FSG have been good owners and done good things for the club. But I feel like fans now, having experienced some success but wanting to push on so we can have the sort of dominance that, say, Manchester City have had, are starting to sort of think, have FSG taken Liverpool as far as they can? Is it time for them to sell up? Because I think some of the thoughts are that for FSG to maybe lead us to another title or put more investment into the squad, we might have to go back a bit to maybe where we were a couple of years ago, sort of around the fourth mark, to then go forward and launch another spring for title success. Whereas, understandably, fans, everywhere in the world, and especially sort of in and around the northwest of England, want Liverpool to return to sort of the powerhouse that we were in the 70s and 80s. It's great to win a title or your Champions League every now and again, but we want to be doing it every year.
Absolutely, yeah. So looking toward next season, one of the things that tends to stand out is really just how many players we have out on loan at the moment. Do you see a future for anybody from the loan army?
Harvey Elliott, for sure. I've caught a couple of Blackburn games this season and he impresses me whenever I see him. In terms of next season, I'm not so sure we'll see him too much. I think maybe a Premier League loan could benefit him, or even a loan to maybe abroad or to a top-end Championship team where, Blackburn play decent football and they're sort of mid-table in the Championship, but maybe if he could go and get some experience playing for a team that's used to dominating the ball every week, trying to break down pack defences, getting used to that sort of winning mentality every week. With that in mind, yeah, in terms of the rest, I'm not so sure. I'd say of everyone out on loan at the moment, I think Elliott's the one who I would confidently say has a future at the club. Harry Wilson's probably one that people will point to and wonder, but I think if we were going to see Harry Wilson thrive and play a role for Liverpool, we'd have seen it by now. The only way I could see Wilson get a role is if we do finish 6th or 7th and we're looking for homegrown players to fill out the squad for the Europa League, in which case maybe he'll stick around for a year, but I could see him being sold.
Makes a lot of sense, yeah. And looking at the summer from a transfer standpoint, what are your expectations there from, I guess, ingoings and outgoings?
Again, very much situated, especially the incomings, on that Champions League qualification. I hate to sort of cast negativity and doubt, but I don't know what you guys think, but I really can't see a strong spend by FSG if we don't finish in those Champions League places. I'm not so sure it would be a case of asset stripping, although if you told me that maybe Mane was going to leave if we didn't get into the Champions League, I wouldn't be that surprised. So yeah, it really depends. If we get into the Champions League, the only sort of sales I would expect is sort of Origi, potentially Shaqiri, looking for more football. Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain, I'd say maybe a wild card, just if he decides, it's very possible that Oxlade-Chamberlain might look at someone like Jesse Lingard, who maybe 2 or 3 years ago would have been in the same sort of boat as him, as sort of, a starter/sub for a top sort of 4 side, on this in and around the England squads, and their careers have both sort of been overtaken by their respective clubs progressing. Look at Liverpool midfield. We've brought Thiago in ahead of him. Curtis Jones is progressing. Obviously, Bruno Fernandes came in ahead of Lingard at United, and both clubs progressed. Oxlade-Chamberlain might look at Lingard's success for West Ham so far and say, you know what, maybe I need to move to, you know, a West Ham, a Wolves, sort of Leicester, maybe those sort of teams that are traditionally sort of around the 10th, 7th mark, and think he can refresh his career there. In terms of Champions League incomings, if, you know, assuming we get fourth, I would love Erling Haaland personally. How realistic that is, we'll have to wait and see. I would possibly expect a goalkeeper. I think we might see the end of Adrian and might see Kelleher go out on loan next season. I do think that we'll buy a centre back in the summer, as well as Kabak, and that is if we, you know, end up keeping Kabak. And then after that, you know, it's anyone's guess. Liverpool are so good at keeping their transfer plans under wraps at the moment that, you know, it's literally a roulette to see what we're going to sort of pluck out of there, if anyone.
Absolutely, yeah. I guess overall, looking at the future, well, actually, hold on before I get to that. James Milner, I know there was some talk when Leeds got promoted that, you know, maybe he'd make that emotional return, given where he started his career. Do you think it's going to happen? Do you think he'll retire with us?
I'm gonna walk and talk to get my phone charger because I have to apologise. My laptop is on the blink, everyone. So I've come on my phone tonight and I've just had a message saying that I'm on 10% battery, and stupidly enough didn't decide to bring my phone charger through. So I'm just going to grab this now and I'll be back with you. Right. So on the subject of James Milner, I like the idea of him going back to Leeds, and not just because he does get slightly more painful to watch in midfield as the years go by. I think that the thing with that was that if Leeds had come up with any other manager, I think he'd have gone back. And that's not because I think that Bielsa wouldn't want him or wouldn't like him, but I just think that style of play, that, you know, fast-paced running, you know, would maybe be a bit too much for Milner. Not that he's not fit enough to play for them. You know, he's one of the fittest players in the league, and fair play to him. But in terms of just having that speed to quickly cover ground in midfield, I think that's lacking, which is maybe, especially if he wanted sort of similar wages to what he's on at Liverpool, which is an absolute huge amount. I can't see Leeds going that financially. But maybe next season, maybe if he wants to do a year after, if Leeds are still in the league and Milner takes a huge pay cut and just says, you know, I've got a season left at the top in me, I want to maybe do some coaching badges, you know, I'll come off the bench for 10 minutes at the end of every game, play cup games, help shore out wins, whatever, just add a bit of experience, help the youngsters. I think then I could see that. But I think I think Milner himself definitely still sees, at least this season and next season, that he can do it at the top level, you know, 90 minutes, at least once a week or once every 2 weeks. And so I think Leeds' very intense playing style probably prevents him from going and doing that for them at the moment. I think when he wants to take maybe a more reserved, part-time approach to his playing, I think that's when he'll go for a reunion at Elland Road.
Absolutely. I know you alluded to it a little bit when we were talking about the summer and just the overall form of the club. But I mean, do you think there's any cause for concern for the future?
In terms of the stability of the club, no. Whilst I think I do have my concerns about certain things that FSG do, I do think that they are good owners overall. I think they've provided the club with good long-term stability. And I wouldn't necessarily panic and think, oh my God, we're going to go back to, you know, finishing 6th and 7th every year if we didn't finish on the top 4 this season. And, you know, this is such a wild season that literally anything could happen. You know, who thought at the start of this season that we'd be celebrating Man City beating West Ham come February, which is sort of, you know, both a testament to how well City have done to be clear of the pack, a testament to how well West Ham have done to be up there, and also sort of, you know, it shows how disappointed we are to be in this position. But, you know, whilst I am a bit concerned about the rest of the season, I'm not really a gambling man, but if I was, I wouldn't necessarily put money on us to get into the top 4, just because I think that we might have just had one injury too many. But I'm not concerned for the long-term future of the club, in that I do think that even if we came 6th, 7th, 5th season, I do think we could be back fighting for titles from next season onwards.
Absolutely. I know a lot has been made of the lack of fans in the stadium, particularly the boost that they get at Anfield, and, you know, the talk of sucking the ball into the back of the net from the Kop. You know, obviously some of the false starts we've seen earlier in the season with some fans, and then that being pulled back. What do you think that return is going to be like for supporters when we do finally get to see a proper amount of fans in the stadium?
It's going to be amazing, and it's going to be such a release of emotion. I think it's not, like I said before, in terms of that match day experience, it's not necessarily just that the 90 minutes. It's what it's going to do for everyone in terms of people meeting up with their groups of friends, maybe at the cafes, at the bars before the match, doing stuff after the match. I think, and it's just representative, the whole world across, especially in the countries that have been the hardest hit by COVID, is that, we've especially we've been able to be in bubbles and see like maybe one other household, we've been able to see bits of people, but in that terms of that mass gathering as a big community where you all sort of harbour that one passion, I think that release of emotions sort of been building up so much in the time that we've all been away. And like you say, there was, I think we had like 2,000 to 4,000 fans back for 2 or 3 games in December. Another example of the UK government's total incompetency, unfortunately. Because it just went against it, and now we're in lockdown again, and will have been from sort of the start of January till at least April. But yeah, it's going to be just a huge explosion of emotion, and I think it's just going to improve people's morale and sort of just day-to-day life so much, regardless of the results. I think it's things like that, and just things slowly being opened up again, and just little things getting better each day, like that day that we get fans back in the ground, that will just make it sort of an amazing experience for both the fans and the players, because I've no doubt that it impacts on the players, whether, for some clubs it might impact more results than others, but I'm sure the players miss it. I'd miss playing in front of 50,000 fans every week if they were all singing my name and we were winning.
Absolutely. I know you mentioned the cafes quite a bit in terms of the match day experience. Have there been concerns in terms of the economic impact of just businesses around the stadium?
Yeah, yes and no. I think it's in the same boat for everyone. It's probably the same in the US, especially when things are shut down. There is often the concern that if they're closed down for too long, are they ever going to come back? Thankfully, we have had the furlough scheme here, so we haven't had maybe as many redundancies and things like that as people were fearing at the start. But I think there might have been the occasional selling of premises from business owners that were a bit concerned about the future and thinking, well, I may as well sell my asset of land and maybe sell the pub, the cafe, whatever now, just so I've got that money in the bank and I don't have to worry as much about the unpredictability. That being said, though, there does seem to be confidence now. The one thing I will credit the UK for is that our vaccine program's going quite well. The numbers are looking good, and it's looking like sort of towards June, July, we are going to be able to get things back maybe more to normal than we have had in the past year. And there is a sense of optimism sort of surrounding the country at the moment, pushing forward. We've had our sort of first day of the year today where it went above 10 degrees Celsius, that is, before I confuse everyone with the temperature. And I went out for a nice walk, and it's just everyone's mood sort of starting to improve. It's getting a bit sunnier, it's getting a bit warmer. Things are slowly starting to get better. And I feel like I've just rambled here and forgot the question. But in terms of, businesses reopening pubs and that, I think there will start to be more investment, and I would be confident that the sort of surrounding area by the stadium is going to sort of reach its previous heights and sort of provide that fantastic match day atmosphere for fans once we get back to it in the summer.
Perfect. Looking forward to it. I think we have a question from Adam that he popped in earlier. But
Okay.
How should the club celebrate the 30th league title when it's finally safe to do so?
We should have a parade and just a mass. It should be like the Champions League parade. I'm sure you've all seen pictures of from the other year. I went to and was one of the best days I've ever had. And honestly, regardless of whether we are top of the league, bottom of the championship, regardless of whether we are 14th in League Two and playing Oldham or Shrewsbury on a day-to-day basis, we should go and grab the Premier League title off whichever club's holding it at the moment, probably Manchester City, and we should have our day because we've all earned it. We've all been waiting so patiently, and it was unfortunate that we didn't get to celebrate it in the way I'm sure we'd have all loved to. But I'm a big believer in enjoy your successes because they don't always come around as often as you'd like. And I would hate if it was the case that Liverpool and the club and the city thought, oh, we can't celebrate this thing we achieved during the pandemic because at the moment we're not doing very well. because, you know, what was the point in winning it during the pandemic then? We could have just null and voided if we were going to have a big party.
Absolutely. Well, so we're getting close to the end here. Obviously, I had a pleasure speaking with you. It's always good to see you. Hope the members have enjoyed this as much as I have. Just a quick reminder before we head out to support your local food banks wherever you might be based. Obviously, we mentioned 2 earlier at the start of the hour that we'd love to see support for, and we've supported throughout this speaker series. Want to wish everyone a good match tomorrow. Hopefully, we get the 3 points, and just over to you, Garrett.